Well, good afternoon. Despite the efforts of all levels of government to date, the issues of rough sleeping and encampments have not gone away. Today, we have a unique window of opportunity to take decisive action to improve quality of life for British Columbians. I am Mercedes from Mental Health and Addictions, and I'm joined today by Fionn from Finance, Carol from Intergovernmental Relations, and Cora from BC Housing. Next slide, please. Before we begin, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the government of BC stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We'll start our presentation off today by first defining our issue, then we will provide some context, discuss our policy options and analysis, and end with plans for implementation. Next slide, please. So as noted in the slide, the primary issue is that encampments and rough sleeping are a result of a confluence of crises and gaps in connecting people to the support and services they need. For this task, we've defined rough sleepers as those who are absolutely homeless and living without consent on the streets or not in places not intended for human habitation, such as public spaces, vehicles, or abandoned buildings. Today, our purpose is to present our provincial strategy on how to best manage the risk of encampment recurrence while balancing the needs and dignity of rough sleepers, those at risk, and the community as a whole. Next slide, please. BC acknowledges that moving people into stable housing quickly is an effective short-term solution to homelessness and rough sleeping. Multilateral agreements with municipalities to collectively tackle parts of this issue have been a key step in addressing encampments. From 2020 to 2021, over $400 million were spent to procure hotels in Vancouver and Victoria, creating over 1,000 beds for decamped individuals. Federal funding from the CMHC Rapid Housing Initiative and grants from the Reaching Home program have also provided much needed shelter beds, housing, and other supports. Despite these efforts, the Ministry of Attorney General and Ministry Responsible Housing has received reports of 50 encampment areas and 1,600 people sleeping rough throughout BC this year. With hotel leases expiring soon and an additional $633 million committed to this issue in the 2022 BC fiscal plan, it is important to seize this window of opportunity. Next slide, please. Rough sleeping is a complex problem, and the challenge lies in addressing its vicious cycle. Encampments have been front and center in the media during the pandemic, highlighting the prominence of its cyclical nature. Housing offered as part of encampment efforts may be insufficient or inappropriate. This can lead to individuals finding themselves sleeping rough again, congregating in encampments, and continuing this cycle. For example, in January of 2022, 37 people were evicted from a procured Vancouver hotel for undisclosed reasons. Coincidentally, 35 tents then popped up in Vancouver. As well, in February of 2022, the encampment on Salt Spring Island was decamped for the 5th time. This pattern suggests that service gaps must be addressed. Next slide, please. In our current state, the cycle of rough sleeping highlights two pressure points where we have focused our strategy efforts: meeting rough sleepers' needs and stabilizing housing. Our goals are to maintain and improve housing stability, improve our understanding of needs, and enhance resource accessibility. This leads us to our future state, our vision to make encampments unnecessary. I'll now pass this on to my colleague Fionn, who will take us through the next part of our presentation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mercedes. This complex issue involves a diverse range of stakeholder groups that are affected by rough sleeping and encampments. We all have a role to play in addressing these issues. Taking a comprehensive approach recognizes that while each group may perceive the problem and propose solution from a different vantage point, the objective is the same. We want to reduce encampments. The BC government has a critical role in balancing these perspectives in its prevention and response strategy. Next slide, please. In terms of contributing factors to this issue, our research demonstrates that rough sleeping and encampments are complex and need an intersectional lens to be fully understood. For example, our research shows that with people experiencing homelessness, 67% live with mental health and or addiction issues. 59% are indigenous, first experienced homelessness as youth. 29% with acquired brain injury. Also, our statistics gleaned from the Victoria's most recent point-in-time count also describe the prevalence of trauma, disability, and youth homelessness as profounding factors to housing insecurity. The most commonly cited reason for loss of housing is insufficient income. Within this homeless population, 62% of Indigenous people have a personal or close family history of attending residential school. This fuels the need for our multifaceted solutions. Next slide, please. To provide strategic guidance to our approach, we selected an objective that focused on annual reduction to support our vision, making encampment unnecessary. A number of criteria have been used to assess the options that focus on putting people first, demonstrate alignment with government priorities, work within existing funding envelopes, and demonstrate shared accountability across key stakeholders. The first criteria, human right focus. We are looking for solutions that address the fundamental human rights to housing and dignity. Next, timeliness. We want solutions that can be implemented or started within the next 3 years. Alignment. We want solutions that support provincial, territorial, federal, and municipal initiatives. Existing funding, solutions that fit within the current budget cycle. And finally, shared accountability. We want solutions that promote shared commitment. Next slide, please. Members of the Cabinet, on behalf of our team, I'm excited to present to you our policy options. We considered a number of approaches and devised 3 policy bundles. Taken as a whole, they represent a phased approach to both prevention and response. Our first policy bundle, intervention, aims to support individuals and families to stay housed, particularly those who were previously living in encampment and provided rapid housing during the pandemic. Aimed at reducing the rate of recidivism, the province has a key role in keeping people out of that vicious cycle and to avoid the proliferation of new encampments. Policy Bundle 2, information. It highlights the need for relevant and timely access to data on a population that has unique and often complex intersecting needs. This will help us respond quickly with an evidence-based decision-making approach. It will also allow for ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Finally, Policy Bundle 3, interconnection. It recognizes that a variety of valuable services exist already, but not everyone is successfully connected to what they need, where, and when they need it. And with that, I will now pass to Cora to present each options in more detail. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Fionn. Research suggests that keeping people housed yields disproportionately large reductions in homelessness. Therefore, our first phase and policy bundle is focused on intervention. Rent supplements in the homeless prevention program are currently limited to market housing and priority groups such as youth, women, and Indigenous people. Opening eligibility to include all rough sleepers and those in supportive housing, more people can stay in their current housing situation, thereby reducing rates of recidivism. We also want to focus on people who are discharged from provincial care and are at risk of rough sleeping at those points. By strengthening the continuum of care and offering more housing, we address supply issues and wait times to transitional housing and services. As mentioned earlier, hotel leases are coming due. Decamp people who have been housed in these properties are at risk of losing their homes. By extending leases, we ensure continuity of housing and community for these people. Next slide, please. The second phase is focused on information. Together, these 3 strategies on the left will improve early identification of rough sleepers, ideally within the first 24 hours of them being on the street, and will build a connected and comprehensive list of people experiencing homelessness. Using a by name list in conjunction with an annual PIT count is a more precise method of collecting data. Detailed and actionable data will lower response times for outreach workers to reach those in need and will provide deeper insights for leadership to make evidence-based policy decisions. The rapid alert system used for early identification is intended as well to strengthen community engagement. Consultation with those who have lived experience has provided us with insight that improving information flows and having a shared platform would relieve some of the exhaustion felt when people are asked repeatedly to provide personal and often traumatic information. Any strategy involving personal data collection will be done in a way that respects privacy. Next slide, please. And finally, the third bundle and third phase is focused on strategies that will improve interconnection, allowing people to have immediate access to the services they need when they need them. Navigation centers are safe places that provide 24/7 accommodation, individualized attention, case planning, and wraparound support. This model has been used with great success in numerous American cities, particularly in San Francisco, where they currently have 7 locations. Reports from San Francisco indicate that the neighboring areas have not experienced detrimental effects from having the centers in their communities. Navigation centers and outreach teams work together to provide services to rough sleepers when and where they need them, with the goal to connect people to permanent housing. To make everything work, we maintain that permanent, affordable housing is a priority. Carol will now share the results of our analysis and describe our implementation and communication strategies. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Cora. With significant planned expenditures and recent investments, this proposal aims to optimize provincial resources with a balance of prevention and response to rough sleeping and encampments. If left unaddressed, citizens and communities will continue to experience the associated social and economic impacts. According to Vancouver's 2020 Homelessness and Supportive Housing Strategy, each rough sleeper connected with supportive housing represents an estimated cost avoidance of $18,000 related to corrections and healthcare spending. Next slide, please. This phased approach is based on a few key assumptions: the continuation of existing federal and provincial programs, and cooperation from municipalities in terms of zoning and regulation for upcoming housing projects. Looking at the top 3 identified risks and their corresponding mitigation strategies, we recognize Cabinet may elect to implement only portions of this proposal. We believe each bundle clearly adds value and supports the government's ability to deliver on its commitment to citizens, as highlighted in the recent budget announcements. Economic factors such as interest rates, inflation, and market housing rental rates may impact the overall cost to deliver these initiatives. Keeping in mind that these would also have a proportionate effect on affordability of housing, this in fact strengthens the case for urgency. Anticipated savings to healthcare and corrections expenditures also serve to offset potential increases. The recommended approach includes, by design, strategies for reducing the size, duration, and prevalence of encampments, if and when they reoccur. However, consistent with our human rights focus, we cannot impose our values on individuals who may continue to choose to live outdoors, but support will be made available. Next slide, please. So all 3 bundles presented demonstrate value against our criteria, and Cabinet is encouraged to consider implementing all 3 as a comprehensive phased approach, with components rolled out over the immediate, medium, and long term. Next slide, please. So phasing our strategy includes concrete actions that the government can announce and implement this year. Activities noted in the green boxes reflect the key strategies included in Bundle 1, intervention. We would like to highlight the importance of balancing short-term results, like keeping people housed through an expanded rent supplement program, with longer-term investments in information systems that will inform the rollout of subsequent programs and ultimately allow for meaningful evaluation and improvements to provincial strategies over time. Next slide, please. So to support successful implementation, We will proactively engage with our internal stakeholders to emphasize we are proud partners in strengthening sustainable solutions to rough sleeping and encampments. Through shared resolve and by leveraging our unique strengths, we can deliver timely and effective results. Meaningful community engagement is identified as another critical success factor. With external stakeholders, including rough sleepers, nonprofits, and the public, we will focus on our citizen-centric approach and a commitment to supporting resilient and thriving communities with this multi-pronged approach. Now I'll turn it back to Cora to lead us through next steps and our conclusion.
Next slide. Thank you, Carol. Our immediate next steps for this phased approach are to assign accountabilities, determine the evaluation framework, and allocate funding. The benefits of this approach and using a phased model are that we will continue to leverage existing programs and the strong collaborative partnerships that we've built. We will capitalize on our recent successes with a timely implementation that is strongly aligned with the BC budget announced this week. We continue in our commitment to British Columbians to build a stronger province, prioritizing community well-being and putting people first. Next slide. In conclusion, by investing in capacity to address encampments and rough sleeping through both prevention and response, we recommit to our vision to make encampments unnecessary by reducing rough sleeping, maintaining stable housing, and improving understanding of people's needs. Thank you all so much for your time, and we will now open the lines for the question and answer period.
So team, thank you very much. That's a most interesting and well-delivered presentation. I'll turn to my colleagues now, starting with Susie McDonald. Susie.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you very much for the presentation. And I note that you include the federal government as a strong stakeholder, and you did reference the transfer of funds under rapid housing and reaching home, the national housing strategy. But beyond that, is there a role for the federal government in what you're doing in British Columbia around housing and rough sleeping in particular? And sort of linked to that, I notice in your risks, you talk about the migration and the need for intergovernmental collaboration, and I wondered what you'd envisioned there.
I'm happy to answer that question. So regarding the possible roles for the federal government, so we have acknowledged, as you mentioned, existing programs and initiatives. We also see that the federal government has a role in really supporting that second bundle around information. So we know that the federal government already coordinates the point-in-time counts across the country. However, we feel that the need for more real-time data and consistency across provinces and territories is also an opportunity for the federal government to step in. In terms of looking at the migration between provinces, we do recognize that current statistics suggest that about 84% of British Columbians experiencing homelessness experienced homelessness while already living within the province. So we do see that there might be some opportunity to collect more data to dispel perhaps myths around migration. So the suggestion that because of our warmer climate that we're seeing more people coming to our province. However, if through our improved data collection, it proves to be a more significant proportion of migration in this province as opposed to others, there's definitely an opportunity to use the federal government or provide a forum at the national level to look at what shared solutions can be proposed.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn now to Janet Golding.
Thank you, and thank you very much to the Tiger team for their presentation. As you alluded to in your presentation, homelessness and rough sleeping is a very complex problem and issue. And if you could really just boil it down for us into a sentence or two, what would you say is the key message that you want to give the Premier on both what the issue is here and what your solution is?
I'm happy to answer that. So as we have presented in slide 5, we really have a vicious cycle. We do see a pattern of a vicious cycle that people are put into rapid housing, but they cannot sustain it, and they end up on the street again. So, and it leads to encampments. I think the message to our premier would be, right now is the time. BC is in such a good position. We have the political willingness to really end homelessness. And now is the time to act. That will be my message to the premier. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Fionn. Thank you. Any follow-up there, Janet? You're okay with that? Okay, let me turn now to James Hughes. James.
Thank you, team. My question is about bundle 3. And if I understand bundle 3 correctly, it is what you're proposing in order to achieve the targeted reduction of 30% in terms of residents in the encampments is by encouraging campers into navigation centers, which will be opened up in time. I think 2024 was the targeted time to open them up. So both in the meantime and thereafter, I understood that you're not going to force people into the navigation centers. You're going to work with them based on a human rights, if you will, perspective or regime, respecting their rights. So you won't force them out. So I guess what I'm hearing is that are you essentially saying that encampments are here to stay? In fact, that there's an eviction moratorium regarding encampments? And what do you say to the residents surrounding the encampments today who now must bear this potentially into the long term, the existence of these illegal facilities?
Would like to take that one.
I can
Cora?
take that. Yes, thank you. So as Fionn mentioned, British Columbia is in quite a good place. I know we said up the top that we do have encampments right now, but the majority of those are smaller. So the large encampments that we saw earlier in the pandemic in Victoria and Vancouver and the main urban centers have been decamped. So we feel like if we can capitalize on this moment and engage the community, especially with bundle 2, we have some community engagement with the crowdsourcing app, and we're hoping to stop people sleeping in encampments and rough sleeping before it really gets to that critical point again. So with bundle 3, the navigation centers, our thought is that we may not need them. It may never come to fruition that we do need them. If we do need them, they will be smaller. They will presumably only be 45 beds versus some of the larger ones that we see in the United States where there are 150 beds. We really don't know if we will need that service if bundle 1 and bundle 2 work really well. If we do need them, navigation centers work in conjunction with our outreach teams. Typically, they speak with people who are living in the encampments and bring them in on a priority basis. Let's say we don't have huge encampments, we would make a more targeted approach to smaller encampments. In the United States, some jurisdictions use just 2 people sleeping together outside as an encampment. So depending on which way we're defining encampment, that's an important thing we'd have to work through as well, as what is our definition of encampment.
Okay,
So
I'm going to interrupt you there, Cora, just so we get enough time to get, when I get a couple more questions in. Let me turn now to Trina Fraser. Trina, do you have a question for the team?
I do. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, what role is there for the rough sleepers themselves in resolving this challenging issue?
I can take that question, and thank you so much for your question. I believe that to take a compassionate approach and to take an evidence-based approach, we do really rely on their lived experiences and to collaborate with people with these lived experiences to make sure that we're meeting their needs. With that said, of course, if they do not want services from the government, that is their prerogative and we respect that. But when they do want to receive services from the government and collaborate with us, we are very welcoming to that, and it's an important part of the data collection to make sure that we can continue to help the communities to give them the services that they need.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. Alan Northcott.
Thanks for your presentation. My question is about the role that NGOs or civil society organizations would play. I wonder if you could just say something about where you see those organizations, who have the expertise on the ground in the various bundles, and how, what could be done to ensure that their expertise is optimally used?
Thank you for that question. Happy to answer. So I do think that the existing supports available in the nonprofit and voluntary sector are very important, and that's really coming at that outreach level or street interaction level, and that we recognize that they're the boots on the ground and that they have a lot of interaction with that lived experience, as Mercedes mentioned. What we're looking at is more of a systemic view, in that there could be lots of great organizations that have very specific supports and kind of niche areas that they are really good at, and but it doesn't mean that they can meet the needs of everyone. And so it's about connecting and ensuring the optimal use of those resources, because we know that their capacity is also limited, but there's great desire to help and support and to coordinate. And I don't think turning people away is definitely not part of the nonprofit sector's plans, or having people give their information multiple times. So part of our integration strategies will include bringing this sector together, especially in part of that data collection. So ensuring that the right access and the right level of information is collected, and that organizations have access to either the aggregate level or at that more individual level, whatever helps support the better decision making, but also the level of care that they need to provide by each organization.
Okay, thank you very much, Carol. The last question, or the second last, Pam McCurry. Pam, anything for the colleagues here? Maybe Pam's frozen. So I've got a question, and I'll come back to Pam. Team, you made you pointed out prominently that that you could do this within existing funds. This was a virtue of your approach, and one recognizes that. But could you explain a little bit more why you didn't try to go for more money, like for example from the feds? What was your reason for showing that you could do what you want to do within existing funding?
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. First of all, I want to acknowledge that BC government this year in budget 2022, we have already allocated 3 times more budget than in the previous one. So we have allocated 600 million over the next 3 years to tackle homelessness. And I believe all these bundles, after some analysis, is we can likely work within this funding to get started.
So in other words, there's actually this year there's a lot more money available, and you're saying we can go with that. Is that right? Okay, so that's very useful for us to know. Let me turn Pam McCurry. I don't know if you were frozen there, if you're whatever. Let me just make sure that anything from you. Go ahead.
Just a brief question about the federal role in all of this. It doesn't seem prominent in your options. Is there anything further that if you're okay on the money, okay on a lot of fronts, based on your analysis, is there anything else you need from the federal government, and is there an obligation on the part of the federal government to assist?
I can take that.
Okay.
So one thing we did consider that the federal government could help with is having a specific strategy under national housing to address rough sleeping or under reaching home, to have a specific strategy for rough sleepers and encampments, because so many urban areas are experiencing this. And if we had coordination and leadership from the federal government on that, that would be really beneficial, I think, not just for British Columbia, but for all provinces and territories. So that would be one thing. We didn't put it in this policy brief, but it is something that we discussed as a team that would be really helpful.
Okay. So colleagues, anything more from the rest of the panel here? Then in that case, then let me say to the team, thank you very much. That was a very well done deck and presentation, and we've enjoyed very much meeting with you.